She reaches across the table. Her hand is small and bone-thin and it shakes. She says it quietly. "Pretend you're my son for 1 hour." The biker across from her does not move. 60 pounds of leather sits on his shoulders. His knuckles are bruised. There's a patch on his chest that most men would step around. He looks at her and his jaw locks. The hospice clock ticks behind them. Outside the window, an Arizona morning burns white over the parking lot. She does not look away. She says, "Please." She says, "I am dying." She says, "I chose you for a reason." She says her boy died, wearing the same ink he wears on his forearm. The biker has not breathed in 12 seconds. Why would an 86-year-old woman in a veteran's hospice ask a Hell's Angel to be her son? Stay with me on this one. Her name is Margaret Doyle. She is 86 years old, and she weighs 91 pounds on a good morning. She lives in a sunlit room on the 3rd floor of a veteran's hospice on the edge of Phoenix. There is a window that faces east. There is a small white dresser. On the dresser is a photograph of a young man in dress blues with a high-end tight haircut and a grin that does not quite reach his eyes. The young man has been dead for 22 years. His name was Daniel. He was her son. Margaret worked 41 years as a school secretary outside Tucson. She buried her husband in 1998. She buried her son in 2004. After that, she stopped going to church, and she stopped answering the phone after 7 in the evening, and she stopped, slowly, expecting anything good to happen to her again. She has no other children. Her sister died in 2017. There are some cousins back in Ohio, but she has not seen them since the Reagan administration. The nurses are kind. They bring her broth and they sit with her when they can. But they have other rooms. They cannot stay. The doctors have told her she has weeks. The cancer is in her bones, and there is nothing left to do but make her comfortable. She has signed the papers. She has chosen the music she wants played. She has written out in her careful schoolteacher handwriting a list of 3 things she still wants before she goes. The first thing on the list is to see her son's grave one more time. The grave is 40 miles away in a small military cemetery, and Margaret has not been able to drive for 2 years. The second thing on the list is a proper Marine funeral for herself. She wants a flag. She wants the rifles. She wants to be laid next to Daniel with full honors because she is a Gold Star mother. The problem is she cannot afford it. Her savings ran out 4 years ago. Social Security covers the hospice and nothing else. The third thing on the list is the one she cannot say out loud. She does not want to die alone. Believe me, that is the one that keeps her awake at 3 in the morning. That is the one that makes her press her face into the pillow and try not to make a sound. For the last 6 months, Margaret has been watching the parking lot from her window. The hospice shares a wall with a small VA outreach office, and twice a week, a group of men ride into that parking lot on Harleys. They are loud. They wear black leather vests with patches sewn across the back. They carry boxes of supplies for homeless vets, and they hand out hot meals, and they sit on the curb with men who have not been spoken to kindly in years. Margaret asks one of the nurses who they are. The nurse hesitates. The nurse says they are a motorcycle club. The nurse says some people are afraid of them. Margaret watches them anyway. She watches the way they greet each other. She watches the way they hug the old men in wheelchairs. She watches one of them, a big man with a graying beard, kneel in the gravel to tie another vet's shoe. She notices something else. She notices the tattoo on his forearm. She cannot quite see it from the 3rd floor, but she knows the shape of it. She has seen that shape before. She has traced that shape with her thumb on a folded photograph for 22 years. It is the Force Recon insignia of the United States Marine Corps. It is what her son wore on his arm the day he came home in a flag-draped box. On a Tuesday in late October, Margaret asks the nurse to wheel her down to the lobby. The bikers are in the lobby that morning dropping off blankets. Margaret sits in her wheelchair by the front desk, and she watches them. The big man with the graying beard is laughing about something with the receptionist. He turns. He sees her looking at him. He stops laughing. He walks over. He crouches down so his eyes are level with hers. He has scars on his face. He has a chipped front tooth. He smells like leather and engine oil and clean cotton. He asks her if she is all right. He calls her ma'am. His voice is much softer than she expected. She asks him his name. He says his name is Rourke. She asks him if he was in the Marines. He says yes. She asks him if he was Force Recon. He goes very still. He says yes, ma'am. She asks him if he would come visit her tomorrow. Just for an hour. She tells him she has something to ask him. Something she cannot ask anyone else. Rourke looks at her for a long moment. He says he will be there at 10. He is there at 9:45. He has changed his shirt. His boots are clean. He carries a paper sack with 2 coffees and a small bear claw pastry. He just did not want to come empty-handed. The nurse shows him to the visiting room on the 2nd floor. Margaret is already there in her wheelchair. She's wearing a soft lavender cardigan and a small gold cross at her throat. She has put on lipstick. She has not put on lipstick in 2 years. Rourke sets the coffee on the table. He sits across from her. The chair is too small for him, and he looks like a draft horse trying to fit at a child's desk. He does not seem to notice. He folds his enormous hands together. He waits. Margaret thanks him for coming. She tells him she will not waste his time. She tells him she is dying. She tells him she has weeks left, maybe less. She tells him her son was a Marine. She tells him her son was killed in Fallujah in 2004, and she has lived in a small, empty house every day since then. She tells him she has no one. She tells him she has been watching him from her window for 6 months, and she has seen the way he is with the other old men. She tells him she saw the ink on his arm and she knew. Then she reaches across the table. Her hand finds his hand. Her hand looks like a paper bird against his knuckles. She says the words, "Pretend you're my son for 1 hour." Rourke does not answer. The visiting room is very quiet. A clock ticks. He swallows once. He looks at the small woman in the lavender cardigan and at her hand on his hand and something in his chest, something he has kept very carefully chained down for a very long time, slips its chain. He says, "Yes, ma'am." He says, "Of course." Margaret tells him she chose him on purpose. She tells him she saw the Force Recon insignia inked on his forearm 3 weeks ago when he was kneeling in the parking lot. She tells him that is the same insignia Daniel wore. Earned in the same valley in Afghanistan, she says, where so many of you boys bled. She does not know yet that this is more true than she knows. She asks him to tell her about himself. Not the patch. Not the club. Just the boy who became the man. She wants to know what kind of son he would have been. She wants to know it in case it is the closest she ever gets. Rourke is not a man who talks about himself. He starts slowly. He tells her he grew up outside Bakersfield. His father was a long-haul trucker who came home twice a year and was mean when he did. His mother worked 2 waitressing jobs and went to bed at 9 and never once raised her voice. He enlisted at 18 because there was nothing in Bakersfield. He tells her the Marine Corps gave him brothers for the first time in his life. Margaret nods. She squeezes his hand a little. She tells him to keep going. He tells her about Force Recon training. He tells her it nearly killed him. He tells her the men who made it through became something more than friends. He deployed 3 times. The 3rd time was Afghanistan, a valley in the east called the Korangal, and a small fight nobody ever made a movie about. He tells her he was shot twice, once in the leg and once just below the collarbone. He tells her his teammate, a kid from Wisconsin named Haverson, dragged him 140 meters under fire to a ditch where a corpsman could get to him. He tells her he was on the medevac for 4 hours and he flatlined twice. He tells her when he woke up in Germany 3 days later, he was missing parts of himself that did not show on any scan. He tells her he came home, and he tried to be a husband and a father, and he could not. He tells her his wife left him in 2011. He tells her his daughter is 26 now and does not return his calls. He tells her the only family he has left is the club. Margaret listens. She does not interrupt. When he finishes, she does not pity him. She just nods, the way a mother nods at a son who has finally come home and told her what really happened. Then she tells him about Daniel. She tells him Daniel was born in the spring of 1981. A colicky baby. A stubborn toddler. By the time he was 10, he could field strip a lawn mower engine. He was 15 the day his father died, and he climbed up on the roof of the house and stayed up there until dark and would not let her come up to him. He joined the Marines at 18, just like Rourke. He made force recon, and she has never been more proud of anything in her life. She tells him about the last phone call. Daniel called her on a Tuesday from somewhere outside Fallujah, and he said, "Mom, I love you, and I'll see you in March." She got the knock on her door on the Friday. She tells him she has spent 22 years trying to figure out what the last sound her son heard was. Whether he was scared. Whether he was alone. Now here's the thing. Rourke listens to her with his head down. When she finishes, he does not say a word. He just lifts her small hand off the table, and he presses it to his forehead, and he holds it there. His shoulders are shaking. He is not making a sound, but he is shaking. A Hells Angels chapter president, a man with 31 years of road and war behind him, is sitting in a visiting room in a veteran's hospice with an old woman's hand pressed to his face, and he is weeping silently into her palm. The hour passes. Then another hour. Then most of the afternoon. They drink the coffee cold. They eat half of the bear claw. He tells her about a dog he had as a boy. She tells him about a peach tree in her old yard. The nurse comes in twice to check on Margaret, and the second time she does not say anything. She just smiles and closes the door very gently. When he finally stands to leave, it is almost 5 in the evening. He looks at her in the wheelchair. He says, "Ma'am." Then he stops. He starts again. He says, "Mom, is that all right?" She nods. He says, "Mom, I will be back tomorrow." She says, "You do not have to." He says, "I know I do not have to." He drives home that night, and he does not go home. He goes to the clubhouse. He walks in, and 60 men look up at him. He stands in the middle of the room, and he tells them what happened. He tells them about Margaret Doyle. He tells them about Daniel. He tells them about the Force Recon Inc. He tells them about a Gold Star mother who has been dying alone in a hospice for 2 years and is asking for a son for 1 hour. He tells them she cannot afford the funeral she has earned. The room is silent for a long time. Then a man in the back, a Vietnam vet named Bear who is 73 years old and missing 2 fingers, stands up. He says, "We are going." He says, "All of us are going." He says, "When?" Rourke says, "Tomorrow at 10. This is where it turns. The next morning at 9:58, 61 Harley-Davidson, motorcycles roll into the parking lot of the Veterans Hospice. The sound of them shakes the windows. People come out of the building to see what is happening. Nurses, doctors, other patients in wheelchairs being pushed by their families. They stand on the front steps and they stare. 61 men in leather cuts dismount in formation. They do not say anything. They line up in 2 long rows. Rourke walks to the front of the formation. He pulls off his sunglasses. He looks at the head administrator of the hospice, a small woman in a navy cardigan named Mrs. Patel, and he asks if they can come up to Mrs. Doyle's room. Mrs. Patel has been the administrator of this hospice for 19 years. She has seen a great many things. She has never seen this. She looks at the rows of bikers. She looks at Rourke. She says how many can fit. He says, "Ma'am will fit." She says, "All right." She says, "All right. Come on up." They take off their cuts in the lobby, and they fold them carefully over their arms. They walk up 3 flights of stairs in their boots, and the building shakes a little with each step. The hallway on the 3rd floor is not built for 61 men. They line up 2 and 3 deep along the walls. They are silent. Margaret hears them before she sees them. She hears the boots. She hears the breathing. She turns her head on the pillow and she looks at the doorway, and she sees Rourke standing there with 60 men behind him. He walks in first. He comes to the side of the bed. He kneels so his face is level with hers. He says, "Mom." He says, "I brought the family." She looks past him at the doorway. The men start coming in. One by one. They do not crowd her. They each take her hand for a moment. They each lean down. They each say the same words to her. They say, "It is good to see you, Mom. We have been waiting to meet you, Mom. We are so glad you are here, Mom." Bear, the 73-year-old Vietnam vet, kneels by the bed last. He has tears running into his beard. He says, "Mom, I served with men like your son." He says they were the best of us. He says, "We have got you. We are not leaving you alone. Not for 1 minute." Margaret cannot speak. She cannot speak because her throat is closed, and because she has never in her life been called Mom by 61 grown men in leather, and because the room is full, and because, for the first time in 22 years, her bedside is not empty. She just holds Bear's hand and she nods. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of these. For the next 11 days, the bedside is never empty. There are always at least 4 men in the room. They rotate in shifts. They bring soup. They bring soft blankets. They bring a small portable record player and a Patsy Cline record because Rourke remembered her saying she used to dance to it with her husband. They play it low. They read to her. One of the younger members, a kid named Tomas, reads her the entire book of Psalms over 4 nights because she asks him to. They braid her hair. They paint her fingernails a soft pink because she mentions she has not had her nails done in a decade. The man who paints them has hands like cinder blocks. The polish ends up crooked. Margaret looks at her fingers for an hour afterward, and she will not stop smiling. They tell her about their lives. They tell her about their kids and their bad knees. They ask her about Daniel. Every one of them asks her about Daniel. They want to know his favorite food. They want to know what he wanted to be before he enlisted. They make her tell the stories over and over, and every time she tells one, she gets a little stronger. On the 4th morning, Rourke comes in with a small velvet box. He says, "Mom, we want to give you something." Inside is a small enamel pin. The chapter colors made tiny. Underneath, in silver letters, it says, "Mom." He says, "We voted last night." He says, "You are an honorary member of the chapter now." He says, "You are the only woman who has ever worn these colors." He pins it to her cardigan over her heart. She puts her hand over it, and she does not let go for a long time. On the 6th morning, she asks him about her son's grave. She tells him quietly. She tells him she has not been able to visit in 2 years. She tells him the cemetery is 40 miles outside of Phoenix. She tells him the first thing on her list was to see Daniel's grave one more time. She tells him she cannot ride in a car that far anymore. The seat hurts her hip, and the jostling makes her sick. Rourke listens. He says nothing. He goes downstairs. He stands in the parking lot for a long time looking at his Harley. That night at the clubhouse, he tells the men. He tells them it is crazy. He tells them she weighs 91 pounds and she has tumors in her spine, and if they hit one bump wrong, she could die on the bike. Bear stands up. Bear says, "Brother." Bear says she is dying anyway. Bear says she asked for one ride to her son's grave. Bear says, "We ride." The next morning, a nurse named Carmen explains it slowly. She says, "Mrs. Doyle," she says, "the men want to take you on a motorcycle to Daniel's grave." She says it would be a risk. She says it might be the last time you leave this building. Margaret looks out the window. Margaret looks at the photograph of Daniel on the dresser. Then she looks back at Carmen, and she says, "When do we leave?" They leave on a Thursday morning. The doctor signs the waiver with a tight face. Rourke has welded a small custom passenger backrest onto his Harley with 3 layers of memory foam and a sheepskin cover, and a harness lined with the kind of fleece they use for newborn babies. They wrap Margaret in 2 quilts. They put a leather jacket over the quilts. They put a soft helmet on her head. Bear lifts her in his arms like she is made of glass, and he carries her down 3 flights of stairs. Rourke is already on the bike. He is wearing the patch she has been afraid of for 6 months, and that she now reaches for like a child reaches for a parent. Bear settles her behind him. They strap her in. They make sure her hands can reach his waist. 60 bikes start at once. The sound is enormous. The lobby windows of the hospice rattle. Nurses are pressed against the glass. A few people are weeping openly. A few are saluting. The convoy rolls out at 35 miles an hour. They take side roads. The Arizona sun is warm. The wind is light. Margaret's small arms are around Rourke's waist. Her cheek is against the back of his cut. She has not been outside in 3 months. She has not been on a motorcycle in her life. She watches the desert go past. She watches the cactus and the long brown hills. 40 miles takes them 90 minutes because they ride slowly, and because at one point Rourke pulls to the shoulder, so Margaret can simply look at the sky. The cemetery is small. White stones in straight rows. A wrought iron gate. 60 Harleys ride through the gate at idle. The sound of them rolls across the headstones like a long, deep prayer. They park in 2 neat rows. Bear lifts Margaret down. The men form up behind them in 2 columns, and they walk together to Daniel's grave. The stone is simple. Daniel Patrick Doyle. Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, 1981 to 2004. Underneath it says, "Beloved son." Margaret puts her hand on the stone. She just stands there with her hand on the warm marble. 60 men stand behind her. Nobody says anything for a long time. A hawk circles overhead. Then Margaret begins to speak to her son. She tells him she is sorry it took her so long. She tells him she has missed him every single day. She tells him she has brought some friends. She tells him they are going to take care of her now. She tells him she is going to see him soon. Rourke kneels. He puts his palm flat on the headstone next to hers. He says, "Brother." He says, "I have got her." He says, "You can rest." When they ride back, the sun is setting orange behind them. Margaret is asleep against Rourke's back before they reach the city limits. Her arms are still around his waist. He brings her home. She lives 9 more days. In those 9 days, the chapter quietly does the thing she could not afford to do for herself. Rourke goes down to the funeral home. He sits in the office of a man named Mr. Coleman, and he tells him what they want. He wants a full Marine Honors funeral for Margaret Doyle, mother of Sergeant Daniel Patrick Doyle, KIA Fallujah 2004. He wants the rifles. He wants the bugler. He wants the flag. He wants her laid next to her son, with the dignity of a Gold Star mother. He wants the bill sent to the chapter. Mr. Coleman, who has been a funeral director in this city for 31 years, and who happens to be the son of a Korean War Marine, listens to all of this. He looks at the patch on Rourke's chest. Then he looks at Rourke. He says, "Son." He says, "I will not charge you for my services." He says, "You cover the casket and the cemetery fee and the rifle volley." He says, "The rest is on me." Rourke shakes his hand for a long time. The chapter reaches out to the Marines. Phone calls are made. Within 48 hours, a Marine Corps Honor Guard from the Phoenix Detachment has confirmed they will conduct the service. A bugler is found. A folded flag is prepared. Margaret does not know any of this. She is sleeping more now. The men are still there. They take turns holding her hand. On her last evening, Rourke is sitting beside her bed. The Patsy Cline record is on low. She opens her eyes and she looks at him. She says, I am not afraid. He says, I know, Mom. She says, I am going to see Daniel. He says, I know. She says, thank you for being my son. He says, thank you for being my mother. She closes her eyes. She does not open them again. She dies a little after midnight on a Sunday. Rourke is holding her hand. Bear is at the foot of the bed. 3 other men are in the room. The Patsy Cline record has run out, and the needle is hissing softly in the empty groove. None of them get up to lift it. The funeral is on a Wednesday. It is held at the same small military cemetery where Daniel is buried. It is a clear, cool morning. The Marine Honor Guard arrives in dress blues. The bugler stands at parade rest. A small chaplain in a green field jacket has come to read the words. 61 Harleys arrive in a long column and park outside the gate. The men dismount. They put on their cuts. They walk through the gate together. They do not speak. The hearse arrives. The casket is brought down. 6 Marines in white gloves carry it slowly toward the open grave next to Sergeant Daniel Patrick Doyle. Behind the Marines walks Rourke. He is carrying a small framed photograph. It is the photograph from her dresser. Behind Rourke walks the rest of the chapter. They walk 3 abreast. They look like an army. The casket is set down. The chaplain reads the words about the Valley of the Shadow and the green pastures. The Marines lift the flag. They fold it with the precise, sharp movements that only they know how to make. The folds are perfect. The triangle is tight. Then the order is given. The rifle volley cracks across the headstones. 3 times. The sound rolls out into the desert and back. The bugler lifts his horn. He plays taps. There are no other sounds in the world for those 24 notes. The senior Marine carries the folded flag forward. He stops in front of the small group at the graveside. He turns. There is no living family. There is just an empty chair where Margaret's next of kin would sit. Then Rourke steps forward. He stands in front of the chair. He removes his sunglasses. He removes his cap. He stands at attention. The Marine sergeant looks at him. The Marine sergeant has been told what to do. He kneels in front of Rourke. He presses the folded flag into Rourke's enormous trembling hands. He speaks the words clearly. On behalf of the President of the United States Marine Corps, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's faithful service. Rourke cannot speak. He holds the flag against his chest. 60 men behind him are weeping openly, and not one of them is hiding it. Bear, the Vietnam vet, is standing at salute with tears running into his beard. A young Marine in the Honor Guard is fighting his own face and losing. The chaplain steps forward. He says one final prayer. Then he closes his book. The men of the chapter step forward in a long single file. Each one places a hand on the casket as they pass. Each one whispers something only she can hear. We love you, Mom. Rest easy, Mom. We will see you again, Mom. When the last man has passed, the casket is lowered slowly into the ground next to Daniel. Mother and son. Together for the first time in 22 years and forever. Rourke does not move for a long time. He stands at the graveside with the folded flag against his heart. The other men slowly drift back toward their bikes. They give him the space. Eventually he kneels. He places his palm on the fresh earth. He says, Mom. He says, I have got it from here. He stands. He turns. He walks back through the rows of headstones toward his brothers and his bike. The wind picks up gently behind him. The small flags on the graves move together once, as if something has passed through them. He carries the folded flag with him. He carries the small enamel pin with the chapter colors and the silver letters that say Mom in his vest pocket over his heart. He carries the memory of an old woman's hand on his face in a visiting room on a Tuesday morning. A few weeks later, the chapter mounts the framed photograph of Daniel on the clubhouse wall next to the brothers they have lost over the years. Underneath the photograph, there is a small brass plaque. It says Sergeant Daniel Patrick Doyle, United States Marine Corps, Force Recon, KIA Fallujah 2004. Underneath that, in smaller letters, it says, and his mother Margaret. Mom of the chapter. She was not alone. Rourke goes by the wall every morning when he comes in. He touches the corner of the frame. He keeps walking. He says he is not telling the story to be thanked. He says he is telling it because every single day in this country, there is a gold star mother in a small room somewhere watching a window and waiting for someone to walk in. He says if you know one, if your neighbor is one, if your grandmother is one, go see her, bring her coffee, hold her hand for an hour. He says you do not have to wear a patch to be somebody's son. Just show up.